Welcome back to the Universalis podcast. I am Martin Kochański, the creator of Universalis, and in this episode I'll be looking at the highlights of the week ahead, starting with Sunday the 16th of March. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that the readings at Lent concentrate into 6 weeks almost all the readings you need to make sense of Christianity. This isn't only for the benefit of us already Christians getting ourselves fit again for Easter. It is also because it is traditional for adults to be baptized at Easter, and Lent is their period of preparation. Either way, the result is that we get important passage after important passage, both on Sundays and on weekdays. Never a dull moment. It does also mean that some of the really great readings get read twice, once in Lent, once outside it. The parable of Dives and Lazarus has its place in September this year, but also in Lent on this coming Thursday. The parable of the owner of a vineyard with his faithless tenants comes on a Sunday in the autumn, but also in Lent this coming Friday. I'd like to pick on another one. The Transfiguration of our Lord is such an important event that it has a feast day of its own on the 6th of August, but its Gospel is also read in Lent on the second Sunday of Lent, this Sunday, in fact, the 16th of March. What are we to do when we get the same thing twice? Human nature has the answer, of course. It's like seeing a famous painting for the nth time. Been there, done that, you say. Your mind wanders until the Gospel is over. It might as well not have been read at all. I think there's a way of doing better than that. Imagine living somewhere where out of the window there is a wide view over beautiful countryside. Fields, trees, hills. Imagine it the way you want. The second time, the third time you see it, do you say, still there, I see? Or, been there, done that? You don't, because each time is different. One day you may see it sharp and clear on a bright and frosty winter morning. Early on a summer's day the valleys may be full of mist bubbling up and burning off. At dusk the colour drains out of it, except perhaps an orange flash as the dying sunlight reflects off the window of a building you hadn't even known was there. There is always more to see, more to discover, even the 96th time you see it. The landscape in some kind of field and tree and hill sense may be the same, but the view is different. The Gospel of the Transfiguration in August and the Gospel of the Transfiguration in Lent are the same in a verse after verse after verse sense, but the view is different, the light falls on them differently. The two great feasts of August are both about glory. The 15th is the glorious Assumption into heaven, body and soul, of Mary, the Mother of God. August's Feast of the Transfiguration on the 6th is about glory as well. I'm not saying that the dark verse about Jesus' impending departure isn't there, because it is, but in the dazzlement of Jesus' face and clothes and the light surrounding Moses and Elijah, we just don't notice it. August's Gospel is all about glory, but we'll think about that in August, not now. In Lent, the Gospel of the Transfiguration is the same, word for word, but the light falls on it differently. The apostles don't know that the Passion and Crucifixion and Resurrection are just round the corner, but we do. That little verse about what is going to happen in Jerusalem catches our attention now, in Lent, because we are going to be living through it all in a month's time. And so the whole landscape is seen in a new way. Now I've said that, it's got me thinking. It's got me wondering whether seeing it here, now, gives a little bit of an answer to the question, why have a transfiguration at all? In plot terms, as you might say, this marks the turning of a corner towards the final acts in the drama of the Incarnation. There is something more, though, which I hadn't noticed before, but which having the Transfiguration here in Lent makes clearer. Who are the apostles who were with Jesus at Gethsemane? Peter, James, and John. Who are the apostles who are witnessing the Transfiguration, dazzled, bewildered, and with no idea of what it means? Peter, James, and John. They knew Jesus as a teacher. They knew him as a healer and miracle worker. They knew, in some sense of the word knew, that he was much more than that. But that kind of inner implicit knowledge, however certain it may feel, depends ultimately on one's trust in one's own judgment. In the utter desolation of Gethsemane, with the spectacle of the all-powerful being made powerless, it would not be impossible to say, I believe, I even know, but I am deluded, I am wrong. Despair is waiting in the shadows, ready to take over when the apostles are at their weakest. We are incarnate beings, and our bodies can come to the rescue of our minds. Our eyes are part of our bodies. The Transfiguration told the apostles' eyes what their minds already knew. In the time of trouble, when their minds didn't know how to carry on believing everything they had thought they knew, their eyes could repeat obstinately, "Never mind all that, we saw what we saw." The Transfiguration may have been a kind of immunization for Gethsemane. Light shines onto a landscape in different ways at different times. At different times, the first readings illuminate the Gospel from different angles. On the Feast of the Transfiguration, the theme is heaven reaching out to touch the earth, and the first reading is Daniel in the watches of the night, beholding the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man. Lent is different, of course. I had thought that what with Moses and everything, we might have had something from that charming time when Moses used to go up Mount Sinai to talk to God, and every time he came down again, his face would be so radiant he had to cover it with a veil to avoid dazzling everybody. But the actual first reading we are given this year goes further back and deeper down, all the way to the establishment of the covenant between God and Abraham. This story from Genesis has all the strangeness of truly ancient things. Animals cut in half, the parties to the covenant walking a path between them. When these halves come together, and this cow, this goat, this sheep come back to life, this agreement will come to an end, and not before. It is apparently a widespread ancient Near Eastern tradition. Abraham is cast into a deep sleep because what is happening is too big for him, and while he sleeps, God comes down in the form of smoke and fire and walks that path. We need these readings from deep time because we are children of the New Covenant, and we must be shown how the New Covenant is a renewal and fulfillment of the Old. Now I am going to cheat just a little. On Monday, Ireland takes a day off from Lent to celebrate the solemnity of St. Patrick, and England, Wales and Scotland in solidarity celebrate him as a feast. But I find the Gospel for Monday of the second week of Lent too enticing to miss. For those of you who aren't hearing it in church today, here is the part of it which has grabbed me. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. This Gospel is considered to be important enough to deserve a place in the crowded season of Lent, but what exactly is it telling us? The danger in becoming familiar with Scripture is that when the words become too familiar, odd phrases can detach themselves and drift away. They become part of our ordinary day-to-day language. Once they are separated from their context, they can start to mean something they are not meant to mean. Do not judge, and you will not be judged is one such example. We know it so well, or think we do, that we come to misunderstand it, and that is dangerous. The misunderstanding is when you take do not judge to mean literally do not judge. If you literally do that, then lying, stealing, adultery, murder, all those actions must be neither good nor bad, since Jesus told you not to judge them. So, for instance, if someone does something bad to you, you mustn't judge the action or call it bad. If someone steals your bicycle, the most you are allowed to do is say that it is inconvenient to you. You can't say it is bad, because that would be judgmental. Turning it round, if you yourself do an evil act, you can't call it bad, because that too would be judgmental. You did what you happened to do, that is all. And because you can't call it bad, you can't ask to be forgiven for it. The way out of this mess is that the true meaning of do not judge refers to people, not acts. As any dictionary of ancient Greek will tell you, its precise translation is not do not judge, but do not pass judgment. As the second half of the quotation from the Gospel emphasizes, do not condemn. Where acts are concerned, not only are we allowed to judge them, to say this is a bad act, we must do so, or we live in a state of moral helplessness, adrift without a compass to guide us. We must judge actions, and we must not pass judgment on people. We must not say this is a bad person, and this for two reasons. First, simply because of the word bad. God created all things good. God created mankind, and so no human being can be bad. Second, because the phrase a bad person has the word a in it, and that is the most dangerous word in the English language. To call someone a is to put that person in a box with a label on it, and then to take that label as the only reality. No longer is this an individual called into existence by God in his infinite wisdom and love. No longer is this an individual tangled up in an intricate net of friendship, enmity, loves, hates, and desires, like all of us. It is just A. Don't ask A what, because it doesn't matter. Any A is bad, because God calls each of us by name, and my name is not A. Distinguishing between judging actions and passing judgments on people is a good thing. We must make that distinction, and in making it, the gospel prohibition makes perfect sense. But still, for the living of our lives, we need to go further. Things do happen, and when things happen, we need to do something about them, and to know what to do about them, we need to judge. Beyond all the verbal distinctions of judge and pass judgment on is another word which hasn't been mentioned yet. It is love. Here is a very simple example to show what I mean. It points the way to a spiritual exercise that I think all of us ought to do when we can. In a cafe I used to go to regularly, one day one of the best waiters wasn't there anymore. He had simply disappeared. I asked the manager what had happened, where he was, and the manager said, "He's been sacked. He was caught stealing, and he's been sacked." I could have taken it at that and put the matter out of my mind. I could have made myself feel really good about doing it. After all, isn't that what the gospel tells me to do? In the same way, I suppose, if I saw my friend one day in a different coloured car from usual, I might casually ask what happened to the old one, but I wouldn't care much about the answer or think any more about it. But waiters are people, and people are not cars. We should think about people even when they are not in front of us, perhaps especially when they are not in front of us. Now at this point one could indeed say bad man and forget about it, but the gospel says we shouldn't. For that matter, one might say about the manager, wicked harsh employer, and condemn him for that, but the gospel says we shouldn't. I'd like to propose a way in which we can get an exercise out of an incident like this. An exercise which builds up our capabilities of love and compassion and increases our appreciation of justice and our desire for it. I should mention, by the way, that what the man was stealing was not a valuable handbag a customer had left behind, or banknotes from the bottom of the till, nothing easily forgivable like that. He was doing something far worse. He was stealing money from the big glass jar that was put on the counter for people to drop tips into. He was not stealing from a stranger or from a business. He was stealing from his colleagues, from members of the same community, you might almost say from his family. He was tied to them by ties of love and trust, and he was desecrating those ties. Rushing to judgment, we could judge him to be a bad man, light-fingered, perhaps behind a lot of mysterious disappearances that couldn't quite be put down to him. Or rushing to judgment in another direction, we could judge him to be a good man, caught one day by a sudden overwhelming need or an overpowering temptation. Perhaps. Perhaps he was neither good nor bad at the start. Perhaps he had been caught short one evening, shutting up shop, with not enough money for the bus fare home. Natural, then, to borrow from the tip jar and put it back the next morning. Natural, when he saw no one noticed, to do it again when the need wasn't quite as urgent. Natural in the end for the borrowing to become a normal thing and the putting back in the morning to be quietly forgotten. I am not writing a novel here. I am showing at least 3 judgments one can possibly make based on what we know about the incident. By making many of them, it shows that any one of them must be unreliable, and so we get back to the gospel, which tells us not to condemn, not to make one definite judgment. What this exercise in making many judgments has done is to take us into the head of the man in question. Not finally, not authoritatively, but as best we can. We have spent some time there. We have tried to make ourselves feel the way he felt, and that is essentially an act of love. That love is not only a duty, it is beneficial as well. The more I try to put myself in his place, the more I can see that I could really be in his place, not as a waiter, which I'm not, but as me. I too am subject to temptations. They could be sudden explosive ones, as his may have been. They could be slow insidious ones, as his may have been, creeping up on me before I can notice what is happening. In this way too, this spiritual exercise is worthwhile. Spare a thought for the manager. It is all very well to say that, as the Gospel tells us, the waiter should not be condemned or labelled as a bad person, but still something has to be done. You could go through the possible causes of the manager's actions just as I have for the waiters. I don't want to take the time to do that here. But let's just be aware that the sacking may not be a condemnation. It may be the best possible thing in the circumstances, even for the waiter. He is not left stuck working in a place where everybody will suspect him always, every time anything gets forgotten or mislaid. He is set free to exercise his waiterly skills, I told you he was a good waiter, in a new place with new people without any bad reputation holding him down. Perhaps. There has to be a perhaps in all these possibilities, we just don't know enough. But the final moral of the exercise is that with all the authority of do not condemn, when bad things happen, someone has to do something about them. The virtue which enables us to do this something is justice. And justice is a true virtue, one we should seek and pray for. It cannot be reduced to a formula. Like all virtues, it is rooted in love, in this case love of everyone involved, victims and transgressors alike. Like all virtues, justice is difficult, and we are easily persuaded to fall back on shortcuts or substitutes, even sometimes, heaven help us, the law. Nevertheless, like all virtues, when the opportunity to practice justice comes along, we have no choice. We have to practice it as best we can. Any preparation we can make for that moment is not a waste of time. In the first reading on Tuesday the 18th, Isaiah tells us all to search for justice. That phrase might just go in one ear and out the other, but after Monday's Gospel, perhaps it won't. I'm going to leave it there as far as the Mass readings are concerned, because in Universalis you can read them or listen to them for yourself. Joseph on Wednesday can be celebrated the way we always do celebrate the greatness of Joseph. The great parables on Thursday, Friday and Saturday can be seen in a Lenten context, just as I tried to suggest for the Transfiguration. And throughout the week, notice how the Old Testament prophets are not in blood and thunder mode, but preaching forgiveness, purification, blessing, hope. Thank you to all of you who answered my hesitant call for donations last week. Even if you didn't quite get around to it, still, thank you. And it isn't too late. The page to visit is universalis.com/donate. That's all for this week. If you'd like to write to us about anything, send an email to universalis@universalis.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Have a good week in every sense, and let's pray for one another.